Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the host and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have problems with these thoughts, FYP.
Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is episode 338 of Registry Matters. Larry, you had snow today?
That would be correct, yes.
Isn't it like 100 degrees?
It was last Saturday.
And it's not anymore?
No, it's going to be in the 30s tonight.
Good grief, man. How do you plan for that roller coaster of like a 50-degree swing?
You get used to it. It's spring and fall weather here.
Don't you have like your sweaters that you have to put away and all that? You bring out your separate wardrobes?
You dress in layers around here because you get up in the morning and it's 35 and then it's going to be 75 or 80 before the day's over. So you have layers to remove.
Well, please head over to, your favorite podcast app and all those places and subscribe and like and 5-star review. You know the drill. It really helps us out. And then if you want to be extra generous, you can head over to patreon.com and /Registry Matters and support us there for as little as $1 a month. And it is a very valued thing that we very much appreciate. And so, without further ado then, what are we going to do this evening?
Well, I didn't write it up, so I'm going to have to do this from extemporaneous speaking. We've got a listener submission that basically we're going to read, and then we've got some good news from Maine, from one of the NARSL advocates. Then our main event is going to be focused on plea bargains, which is your favorite number 2 thing after the kabuki machine. And then we have, what did you throw in? You've got some content down at the bottom that you might want to describe from YouTube.
Yeah, one of them is just from YouTube, and then one of them is from a longtime patron asking about almost what I would call the sky is falling. Could we call it that?
It might very well be falling.
All right, well then, first up, let us go to this listener submission that says, oh God, I have that one in the wrong order. Let's try that. Nope, that's in the wrong order too. Nope. I'm trying to get the right screen up, Larry. So my cousin is currently being prosecuted in South Carolina for a trial set for next Thursday, the 17th. His attorney has fluctuated in their stance on whether he has violated any statutes. The state law enforcement division claims he was not required to report it, yet they are not the ones handling the prosecution. And so then there's a follow-up. Do you want me to go right into that before we talk about it?
Let me respond to what you read there. It's funny. To me, this is hilarious. When you read what you read there, they're not the ones handling the prosecution.
Yeah.
It is so disingenuous when something like that. It's kind of like when you go down to the PFR office to register and you're 4 days late and they went and swore out a warrant for you. The PFR registrar that tracks you goes and does a lot of work, sits down at the computer, drafts up an affidavit for an arrest warrant, cites why you're required to register and what you didn't do. And then when you come down to the PFR office, when you realize that you're supposed to be there, they have the warrant and they say, the judge issued a warrant for you. And they all act like the judge just woke up one morning and said, I'll issue a warrant for Andy today. And they sought the warrant. So this is about as disingenuous. They're not the ones handling the prosecution, but they're the ones that referred it to the prosecution and suggested a prosecution, put the affidavit together. They did all the stuff, and then they try to claim that they don't have any responsibility for it. I mean, can you admit that that's funny?
That's probably not funny, but is this just someone not understanding the process?
They understand the process. They're people who are wimps, and they want to pretend like that they're not at fault for it, and they're very much at fault for it. They initiated, sought the prosecution, and they caused the prosecution to happen. The prosecutor's office would have never known about the person not reporting information unless it was put down on a piece of paper and sent to them requesting a warrant. So they very much aware of it, and they caused it to happen.
What I'm actually asking is if the person that submitted this saying that my cousin, is it possible that they don't understand the process? Or do you believe that this is really them passing the buck almost to confuse you?
Oh, no, I don't think they're passing the buck. I think that the prosecution saying that if they make the comment that it's out of our hands, it's not out of your hands. You're the one that caused it to happen.
I see. Well, then the follow-up is the judge concluded that he was not guilty in this instance, citing the absence of evidence to support the claim that he owned the account in question, as he was only a user. The legal statute explicitly mentioned the offender's account, not an account belonging to another person. I don't fully understand what I just read either.
Oh, well, I understand it. What the judge, what the attorney would have done is looked at the statute very carefully, and this is what we get paid to do. We get paid to figure out a loophole that will cause you, as the prosecution, not to be able to win your case. So if I read that statute 30, 40 times and it says the owner of the account, then I would put forth in the defense of this individual, I would say, where's the proof that he owns the account? It didn't. If the language of the statute says owns or uses, like a vehicle, they have the latitude to say a vehicle owned by the offender or used regularly or used frequently or something like that. But this is a situation where the language, I mean, the judge is being a textualist. If it requires that the person own the account and there was no proof shown that the person owned the account, we don't just convict them because they should have been convicted.
Okay. Anything else to cover here before we go along?
Well, congratulations to the person. And I'd say the attorney did a good job. I don't know if it was private counsel or public defender, but to jam this down their throat or up some other place, whatever you want to call it, anytime we win a case, what I'm as committed to defending people as I am, I'm happy. I don't care if they did it or not. I'm happy when their case falls apart.
Well, all right. Hey, I want to ask you before we do this one, what is LD 1215? What is LD?
I was going to ask you that.
Holy moly, man. Like legal doctrine? I have nothing. I get like law. What would LD be in relation to what Maine is? Someone in chat, help me out with this as I read this.
Well,
Says, hi, Andy and Larry.
It's obviously legislative something, but what does the D stand for? I don't know. It's a proposal, but it would normally say like HB,
House bill or Senate bill,
or a legislative bill. But I've never seen LD. I don't know if that's a typo or if it's actually LD, but that's what it says. And that's what it says.
Legislative document. Could it be that?
That's probably what it means, because that's what's on the official document out of the state of Maine, which I'm holding in front of me right now. So it's legislative document.
Very well. So I hope this finds you both well. I wanted to bring legislative document 1215 in Maine to your attention. It's not a full-blown victory, but definitely a sort of win in our state, and one worth taking note of. I've attached both the original bill proposal and an opposition letter from the SOMB and Risk Management Advisory Commission for your review. So that's Sex Offender Management and Risk Assessment Advisory Commission. Wow. How would you do that? SOMRAAC. I don't think you can spell that out. For your review. I'd love to hear Larry's thoughts on this in his official capacity as Captain Doom and Gloom. But I think you're not just Captain. I think you're just Mr. Doom and Gloom. I'm curious if he sees the same cautious optimism we do here, or if we're missing any red flags. For context, I'm one of Narsol's contacts here in Maine, and we're watching this one closely. If it's something that might be relevant for the podcast, I'd be happy to provide more detail or keep you updated as things develop. All right.
Well, I did read the letter from the PFR Management and Risk Assessment Advisory Commission. They didn't see any benefit to the proposal, to the document being enacted. And I read the document, and Maine has a very strong preemption of control of PFR. They don't let the locals do very much in Maine. I would say that's a state governed by a bunch of liberal lefties, if you ask me. But it's definitely a good victory. We're a state that has that doctrine also, thanks to our state advocacy efforts here. We have that same preemption. But in the other states, most of them haven't. They've not been created by legislative action. They've been created by judicial intervention, by courts interpreting that there's a state superintendent control. And there's so many states that have all these restrictions. The fact that Maine has a PFR board that advocates against this and is willing to put that in writing, and the chair, Kent Avery, was willing to put his name on this. This is fantastic. But I got a question for Jay, the submitter of this. You said you were watching it closely. Did you have a plan for what you would do if it gained traction, or were you just going to watch?
I know, right?
Watching
Yes,
is a good
we
thing.
need people to volunteer for our state advocacy group to watch for bad shit to happen.
Well, you do need to watch because otherwise you won't know about it. But you have to have plan B. If it's gaining traction and moving, what are you going to do next? Watching won't stop it from passing if you don't have a plan.
Look, man, you can just watch the train wreck. You can still do that.
Yeah,
Isn't that a viable strategy?
I get such a kick out of people. They're saying we're watching. Well, we watch here in New Mexico. We watch very carefully, but we also have a plan for in case something starts moving.
All right. Do we want to follow up with this? And so what was this? Like, this is just a proposal, and for what does this actually mean, though? What are they trying to get out of this?
Well, they wanted the authority to put place for local communities could have their own PFR restrictions. The only thought we would need to do is if it's dead or if it's still alive. But it looks like to me, the way I interpret it, it's dead.
Okay.
So,
would this be similar to that home control thing in Texas from forever ago?
Sort of, except Texas has the authority for locals to have their own restrictions.
If there are over, I think it was 5,000 people?
No, everybody has. Remember, they changed the law after the court
Okay. Oh,
ruled
that was them changing the law to then make it everyone had it. Before that,
Yeah.
it was some number.
It was the home rule cities that were the larger cities, but the small towns didn't have the authority. And I told the Texans they will change the law. I mean, they will do to what the court decided. So,
And they did.
and they did.
Okay. So my favorite subject after the kabuki machine is people taking plea bargains. And I'm certain that you've heard the people say that we should completely shut down the whole judicial system and everyone should take everything to court, right? You've heard that?
I've heard it. It's in the script tonight.
Okay. Well, this episode is intended to focus on plea bargaining, which is really a terrible term. Is the outcome really a bargain for the accused?
Yes, the outcome is frequently a very good bargain for the accused.
Now, I see how we can be going at this for some time tonight, but how do you keep a straight face saying it is a bargain for the accused?
It's not difficult at all because it's the reality of the situation. People are often facing decades or even life in prison. The plea process reduces their exposure, if it's done correctly, and provides some level of certainty to the outcome. And I'm putting the big if it's done correctly.
What does that mean, though? What does that mean if it's handled correctly? Is it possible that it's not handled correctly?
Oh, it's very frequently not handled correctly. They don't drive a hard enough bargain. If you take the first offer, it's kind of like anything else. The first offer is often not the best offer.
I
But
see. Okay.
You're trying to limit the exposure and get predictability in outcome. And if you do those things, it is a bargain. I would much rather be facing a finite amount of time. When you have no plea bargain, if they got 45 counts, each carrying maximum of 10 years can be set consecutively. You can do the arithmetic there, 450 years in prison. If I can cut that risk down to 10 years, it is definitely a bargain.
Sure. Well, you say that they are facing decades or life in prison. The reason they are facing life in prison is that the prosecution has stacked charges. Please admit that that's true.
Okay, yes, I can admit that it's true, but it still doesn't change the reality. Prosecutors do indeed stack charges, but the accused can always go to trial and force it that each and every charge be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
But they'll invent charges to force the defendant into a negotiating posture. I mean, they'll stack it saying that you practically were one of the 9/11 terrorists to get you to, like, I mean, I'm going to be convicted of something, if not that. So I may as well take what they've offered.
Well, I'm not sure that I completely agree that they invent charges.
Embellish.
Yes, that I'll agree with. But if they do and you can prove it, that's a breach of ethics subject to sanctions. Prosecutors actually have a higher ethical obligation. But nevertheless, it still does not change the reality of the situation. Take your case to trial if you believe there's no evidence supporting the stacked charges that they invented.
I I think, Larry, that it's obvious that you believe so much in this system, the same as you believed in the kabuki machines when we first started doing the show.
I still believe in the kabuki machine because it works. Everyone we sent to a kabuki machine operator admitted their criminal culpability after they failed the kabuki test. It gets people to tell the truth. It's kind of like the dog barking at intruders. Most intruders go away. The kabuki machine works. Whether it's scientifically based or not, it still works.
I gotta say, you're hopeless on this. I have seen cases where the sentences handed down for similar crime where defendants were prosecuted under the same statute were astonishingly disparate. Why does it seem that often the penalties bear no relationship to the severity of the crime?
Well, we could spend the whole episode on that. There are many variables. The sentencing practices vary dramatically within a state. But before I even get into the scripted part, the offense you could have, let's just pick one out of thin air, criminal sexual penetration of a minor under 13. Well, if you're 17 and you did that to a 13-year-old that was just 2 days shy of being 13, that's the same charge as if you did criminal sexual penetration to someone who's 9 years old and you're 45 years old. It's under the same statutory charge, but it's a significantly different set of facts. But the sentencing practices dramatically, even within a state, you will have variances. I'd say that those facing sentencing in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, you familiar with Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I've heard of her, yes.
Well, that a portion of northwestern Georgia where she represents is largely conservative and very law and order. I would say that they would typically receive a harsher sentence than someone sentenced in the court within the city of Atlanta and Fulton County. Just the reality of life. People are different from state to state and even within the same state. I'd imagine that if Larry Krasner were to seek the job for district attorney and were in the state of Kentucky, he would likely lose. The people of Kentucky are not ready for such a pointy head.
How can you explain and justify when a non-contact offender is punished far more severely than a violent or contact offender then?
Well, that one's easy to explain. It's what the people want. The citizenry is frightened by non-contact offenders, and we the people have made tough laws for those who commit such heinous offenses. If the penalties were not on the books, the prosecution couldn't seek to have them imposed, could they?
No, I suppose not. And I think that most of those laws were written prior to the internet, or at least, if anything, at the infancy of the internet, before it was so easy to just snap a photo and distribute it to, I don't know, 1 million of your closest friends.
Well, that possibly would be true, but they've certainly been a plethora of enhancements through the years since the internet because the doom and gloom scare people that use scare tactics, they tell us that our children are being exploited every single day by all these vultures out there that are creating this ugly stuff, and they need to be put away for life. And the people who consume the product are creating the demand for the producers. And there's some truth in that logic. If there's no demand for a product, very few products are made without demand. Would you agree with that?
Well, unless your name is Steve Jobs, yes.
So yeah, I would say that it has gotten harsher since the internet, but we've had penalties for you've never been able to, in my lifetime, which stretches 184 years, you've never been able to circulate freely pictures of minors without any consequences.
So how do you explain the differences between the state and federal court systems?
Well, the difference between state and federal court is rather dramatic. First, the severity of the offense and the penalty range is established by Congress when it comes to federal crimes. You're probably aware that Congress has reflected the mood of the country for the last 30 plus years, which is to be tough on crime. The result is that penalties in the federal system have become quite severe. Second, it's important to remember that Congress abolished parole back in 1984 when we had President, I think it was named Reagan.
I've heard of it.
And they abolished parole, and they also effectively got rid of good time as well, with the exception of 15% a year. The result of these two actions is that most convictions result in the person serving 85% of their time that was imposed. And third, the federal sentencing guidelines are filled with a plethora of factors that add additional time to a person's sentence because it's a grid, and you're real fond of grids and computers and everything else, but it basically does a computerized calculation of your life criminal history if you have any, and it assigns a severity level to the crime to start with, a base offense level, and then all these factors that are in the computer that spits out, you get enhancements for. And then there's a few reductions, but you generally can find yourself a lot easily getting enhancement than a reduction.
Now, look, I got a kind of a bone to pick with you about. You keep blaming the people, like we the people, for this problem. Do you actually believe that most voters pay attention to the criminal penalties?
Yes, I do believe that they do. It's important to note that there was a bipartisan effort in Congress to reform the federal sentencing scheme back in 2016. And unfortunately, that effort collapsed after then candidate Donald Trump began proclaiming himself as the law and order candidate. And for those who don't believe and think that I made this up, we've got a link to the article from 2016.
I do seem to recall, it's been a while, it's been 10 years now, about that happening. So let's move on, though. It is important to note that the overwhelming majority of all criminal cases are resolved by plea agreements. Isn't it to like 95% of them are plea agreements?
In the federal system, it's even higher, but in the state system, it's in the 90s, yes.
Okay, and then so most of them are resolved by plea agreements. So comparing plea agreements to trials is relatively easy. As a general rule, those who risk going to trial are punished far more than those to resolve the case by a plea. What if everyone stuck together? Come on, if everyone stuck together and nobody pleads guilty?
Not going to happen. Just wishful thinking. Defense attorneys have an ethical obligation to seek the outcome that's in the best interest of their client, best resolution of their client's case. And it would be totally unethical for an attorney to suggest teaching the system a lesson. And beyond that, very few defendants would be willing to do that for the collective good. I mean, you've been in America for a number of years. How much do we concentrate on the collective good here?
I think we say we are. I don't know how much the collective good is actually at the end.
So it's every person for him or herself here. Remember, we're the land of the individual here, and
Yep.
we think
What's
that
in
the
it for me?
Europeans are crazy for thinking collectively.
Yeah. And other countries. All right. So is there a difference between the plea process in federal versus state?
Yes, there are vast differences in terms of what a plea agreement actually does. In state courts, the plea agreement often limits the range of incarceration and can even specify exactly what the actual sentence will be if you bargain hard enough and if the prosecution is willing to do that. But that is just not true in the federal system because at least we at FYP are not aware that federal judges will accept plea agreements that bind them to impose a particular sentence because they have to run that through the computer. You remember the brilliant eye in the sky that does all the analysis, of the grid, and then they have to cite for the record why they're doing a downward departure, if they choose to do a downward departure from what the computer tells them. So therefore, it's very much different because you're negotiating on a different playing field in the federal system from where you're in the state. The judges are far stricter. The system doesn't allow the latitude.
All right. And I remember a few stories that had been printed in the Dallas Morning News. The first one was about a couple who were convicted of killing a baby by spiking his formula with vodka and then sitting on him, which resulted in his death. The second was about a CP defendant that had been sentenced to how many years? 300 years. Now let's hear you explain and justify that disparity.
Well, even though you didn't mention it, it's likely that the death of the child was prosecuted in state court since most homicides are state matters. And it's likely, or maybe at least possible, that the child porn prosecution was in federal court. But it could have been prosecuted in the state court system as well. But Texas is tough on CP possession and tough on crime in general. They're proud of their toughness on crime. But since we do not know for certain if the CP was in federal, we will proceed and assume it was a state case. The harshness of the sentence for the CP case probably was due to the high number of images, which translates to a huge number of individual counts and the actual content itself depicted on the images. You're going to get treated harshly, much more harshly, if you've got CP of a 2-year-old. And it's going to be even more harsher if you've got some kind of object being inserted into the 2-year-old. If you've got a 15-year-old and it always is just nudity, that is viewed much less. I mean, it's still illegal. But in contrast, the death of the child was a one-count prosecution. I mean, there's only one dead child, which may have been somewhat difficult to prove because there were two actors, and proving which one was more culpable could have been problematic. And it's very common for non-contact offenders to be sentenced harshly because the number of counts directly controls the cases. So the more images they've got, that's often results in situations where a non-contact offender receives more time in prison. But you got to remember, when the person negotiates their plea, one of the things they're trying to do is exposure. So if you've got 47 counts of CP, your position is, I'm willing to plead to one. And of course, the prosecution is not going to drop 46. But every count you can X off of that, you've reduced exposure, which is the whole game here, unless you want to take it to trial and prove it's not, have them prove that you're the one who possessed it and that all the elements of the crime that they can meet.
Are you a first-time listener of Registry Matters? Well, then make us a part of your daily routine and subscribe today. Just search for Registry Matters through your favorite podcast app. Hit the subscribe button and you're off to the races. You can now enjoy hours of sarcasm and snark from Andy and Larry on a weekly basis. Oh, and there's some excellent information thrown in there too. Subscribing also encourages others of you people to get on the bandwagon and become regular Registry Matters listeners. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Registry Matters right now. Help us keep fighting and continue to say FYP.
Now, just a little anecdotal story that I have heard is that in the case of CP, now you have to think of there being individual frames, like back in the day where you had like pictures where they're like, and it would move through 24 frames per second, that they would count each frame of something like that as an individual image of the CP. So you end up with, here's 30,000 images, and like, how would you... It was one movie, or what? I'm not trying to condone the activity, but that just seems like creative accounting, let's just say.
Agreed.
Now, I figured you could justify that insanity. Now, we hear a lot about sweetheart deals. How can you keep a straight face and justify sweetheart deals? You claim to believe that everyone should be treated fairly, Mr. Larry.
I do believe that everyone should be treated fairly. But you're omitting a lot of factors that are relevant. The strength of the case against the defendant plays prominently into in the plea bargain negotiation process. For example, if the prosecution has an open and shut case, the plea offer may be, and likely will be, less favorable. I don't need your plea. I can convict your stupid ass. You were stupid enough to give a signed confession on videotape, and you've given us an easy win. The prosecution's case is much stronger if the accused has provided a statement, or where there's forensic evidence that connects the accused to the crime. Even without forensic evidence, there can be a strong case depending on the credibility of the accuser. But what you need to keep in mind, and the audience needs to keep in mind, is that the legislative branch, not the defense attorney, establishes the penalties for criminal behavior. And it's very difficult for the defense attorney to, one, suppress most confessions, which most all defendants voluntarily give. Two, it's impossible to control the makeup of the likely jury pool. People live in your community or they don't. The jurors come from your community. So the defense attorney can't give you a favorable jury, a pool from the city of Atlanta, if you're down in Plains, Georgia. So that's out of our control. And the defense attorney does not have control over the rules of evidence, which some of those rules make defending these cases, particularly those accused of sex crimes, very difficult.
And so what you're saying in summary is you believe in our system. You believe that this system is right and true. Is that fair to say?
I do believe in our system, while at the same time recognizing it has been hijacked by the victim and advocate industrial complex. They believe everyone accused of a crime is guilty and should be severely punished. They are like the judge in this article. Well, we never got to it, but I have it hold it for several weeks. He said he believed all defendants were guilty, thus he could not serve on a jury. And then he ultimately resigned after saying that he, he believed everyone's guilty. I mean, what kind of judge would be stupid enough to say something like that? I mean, you get out of jury duty, but also it sets aside your impartiality as a neutral party judging cases. If you believe everybody's guilty, you just you just sowed seed of doubt of your impartiality. You're supposed to be a neutral referee. That judge was funny.
I put the article up there. It's from CBS News. There's a question in chat says, how do we claw it back away from the victims then?
Wow, that's a question I hadn't thought much about. And it's going to be hard because victims advocates have a lot of organizations. They outmatch our advocacy maybe 20 to 1, 100 to 1 in terms of fundraising ability. They have easy access to the media in a favorable setting. If you go in as a victim, you are really thought highly of. That makes you somehow a hero. And I'm not minimizing victims, but I've been a victim of a crime myself. But it still doesn't change that we have an adversarial system where the proof is supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt and you're supposed to be presumed innocent. And I don't know how we take away the hijacking because they're extremely influential through the legislative process.
Well, very well. Okay. So let's see if we can't pull this one off. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I'll try. So this individual left a comment on YouTube that outlined the situation, and I tried my best to clean it up, Larry, but wow, we'll do our best, okay?
All righty. Well, I am hoping that you can make this sensible because I'm having a big struggle.
Totally with you. So here's the situation as I could decipher from the YouTube comment. It was very long, and I just thought maybe it would be something worth covering. All right. In 1999, I received a downward guideline departure in Michigan, and you just talked about the different guideline departures about in plea agreements, and this was in Michigan. A 90-day suspended sentence with no jail time, no fines, no restitution, and no PFR registration. Fast forward to June 9th of 2015, Judge Jocelyn of Tuscola County formally terminated my case, handwriting that the defendant is not a threat to the community and that any registry requirement would be an exercise in futility.
Now, I can understand that. So 16 years went by and his case ended and he didn't have to register as a PFR, apparently.
Yes, I know. If this is all anecdotal, this is what he says. And then in 2012, which is 3 years prior to the judge saying that thing, in 2012, a false accusation in Idaho labeled me as an unregistered pedophile. Although I lived in California and was a full-time college student, 2 U.S. Marshals attempted and failed to serve me. When I returned to Idaho in 2018 to renew my vehicle registration, authorities forced me onto the registry without due process, effectively reactivating a terminated case in an ex post facto manner.
Okay, now I can understand that.
Really?
To that point, yes, he got in trouble in Idaho, and the background check resulted in Michigan that he had a PFR type conviction. And Idaho law probably requires he register. So the authorities were trying to get him in the registration system. So far, I'm still with it.
Okay. Wow. Oh, and then I guess as a student, you don't have to register in California to have your license. You can have you just go back home and re-register. So that's why he went back to Idaho in 2018 to renew his license. Is that kind of like where that's going?
That's where I think it's going, yes.
Groovy. All right. And then in 2022, I moved back to Michigan due to severe illness. Gooding County's sheriff in Idaho ordered me to re-register within 2 days, which I did. Yet Michigan refused to register me or pursue the matter. Idaho threatened U.S. Marshals enforcement, issued a nationwide fugitive warrant carrying a possible 10-year prison term and a $5,000 fine. And I was arrested in Michigan after reporting an assault. My mother posted bail.
Okay. Now, I can sort of understand that because Idaho forced him to register. So there's a loop closing needs to take place. When he got to Michigan, he needed to close the loop so that Idaho would not issue a warrant. So he needed to, at the very minimum, present himself to whatever official does the registration in the jurisdiction where he was going to be living in Michigan. And what I think happened is the case broke down because Michigan didn't register him and close the loop. And they should have communicated to Idaho, he presented himself, he doesn't have to register here, we've closed the file. And that's the missing link in here. But that's what I think happened.
All right. And then finally, after I filed a motion, the federal district court confirmed I never needed to register. Idaho dismissed the case, but still insists I must register there and leave the state, making my planned return impossible. This ordeal shows how a fully terminated case can be improperly revived without any legal basis.
God, I don't see any problem with that. I don't know that if he goes back to Idaho, Michigan doesn't control Idaho's registration requirements. So if Idaho's statute covers him, they are correct. He might have to register if he goes back. Now, I don't think they can order him to come back there. He said they still insist I must register there and leave the state. That part is a little bit convoluted. If he's not there, they don't have jurisdiction over him. And they certainly can't tell you to leave the state. But they can tell you, if you come back here, boy, you will have to register.
I think they only say that in the South, not in Idaho.
Oh.
So is this do you believe that this is a plausible story?
I do. I believe that we're missing some details that could probably be clarified, but I think that what happened was that Michigan didn't close the loop properly. That once it was established that he had attempted to register in Michigan, did not register him. The feds can't force a state to register you, boys and girls. Get over it. It's a state decision whether or not they want to cover you. Now, a lot of states have chosen to mimic the federal law and say that if the feds define you as a registrant, then we're going to register you. But they're not required to do that.
Now, and just, I guess, speculating, what is all the different laws and the changes in Michigan? How does that impact him in all of this? If didn't we just report on a huge win in Michigan?
We did, and I don't know. I'd have to get into more details, knowing that how that's going to be interpreted. That's above my scope of knowledge. But he doesn't have a registration obligation according to Michigan. The judge said no benefit would derive. So apparently he doesn't have a registration obligation.
And if he's in Michigan, in the sovereign state of Michigan, then Idaho go pound sand?
That's my position, that Idaho can go pound sand. But I mean, I can't guarantee that someone won't take out a warrant. They do stupid stuff all the time.
And if there's a warrant and the Michigan police pull him over, that would show up potentially? If he got pulled over by state troopers on the highway, that seems more exposure than just your county person?
Well, everybody has the NCIC available to them. So if there's a nationwide warrant, what they generally do is they put a zone of extradition. And so a state will say, we'll come anywhere in the state to get them. Now, that doesn't make any sense to somebody who lives in Rhode Island, where the state is 48 square miles. But in a state like Texas, where we're transporting a prisoner from one corner of Texas to another, or one corner of Alaska to another, or one corner of California to another, can be quite expensive. So they'll say statewide, or they'll say statewide and contiguous states that border that state, or they'll say nationwide. So if the NCIC warrant says nationwide, they're obligated to arrest him. If it says Idaho and bordering states, they'll look at their map, they'll pull out an old-fashioned paper map, and they'll look at it and they'll say Idaho. Let's see, Michigan, Idaho. There's no connecting border here, so he's not extraditable under the terms of this warrant, and they'll let him go. And they'll tell him there's a warrant out for you, but luckily for you, it's only state of Idaho and contiguous states.
There's a warrant, but I don't have to exercise it on you right now because you're not within the jurisdiction, you're not within the zone of where it would be, but good luck.
Some officers will do that. Some officers will never tell you that they found an active warrant. They'll hope that you're stupid enough to go back to closer to the state so you can get picked up. But some officers will tell you that, hey, there is a misdemeanor warrant out for you in Georgia, but here in Michigan, we're not going to arrest you for that because it's only good for Georgia or Georgia and the surrounding states or whatever.
And someone says in chat, they'll arrest him, but they might not hold him for very long. If they don't come and get him, they'll release him. He said that happened to my son in Michigan.
That is correct. That can happen. So this extradition decisions are not made by computers yet. So what happens when someone's picked up on what is an extraditable warrant, say it's nationwide, but some parts of the nation are more expensive to get to than others. Hawaii is a part of the United States, right?
Last I checked, it's the 57th state, I believe.
So, but and I'm being extreme, but depending on the distance and the ease of extradition, they might look at it in the prosecution office, and depending on whose budget it comes out of, some states it comes out of a state extradition fund, or it may come out of a local prosecutor's office budget. They'll look at that and they'll say, no, we're not going to go that far. We'll wait till he gets a little bit closer to us. So,
Well, alrighty then. Hey, I got a question for you. Have you seen the recent news with the certain president that said he was going to go like send the worst of the worst in the United States down to El Salvador? Did you hear that?
yes, I've heard about it.
All right. Well, one of our patrons asked me earlier today. He says, and I titled this, "Should I Worry About?" And it says, as reported by all of the major news outlets, President Trump has recently proposed deporting U.S. citizens. And I think already you're going to have a problem with the word deporting. So we're going to have relocating?
Yes.
Okay. So proposed relocating U.S. citizens, as he describes as homegrown criminals, to foreign prisons, specifically suggesting El Salvador build additional facilities to detain Americans. This idea, discussed during meetings with El Salvadorian president, I do not know that I've ever heard the pronunciation to where I could like grasp it, so I'm not even going to try, but just the El Salvadorian president, targets individuals convicted of violent crimes, though legal experts universally condemned it as unconstitutional. Given we are already on a list, it's not very big of a leap to think that some or all of us would be considered as homegrown criminals. And my question to you, Larry, is should we worry? We as in PFRs.
Yes. Anytime that you have, now I'm going to be very careful because I don't like to accuse people of things that I don't have firsthand knowledge of doing. I've not seen this. I've heard about it tangentially, that the president wants to deport U.S. citizens. But if that is in fact true, that would be very dangerous. You can't deport your own citizens that were born in the United States. But now what you can do, I don't think there would be any prohibition against this constitutionally. I think you could have homegrown criminals housed in cheaper facilities. Now, most people will acknowledge that the cost of most things are cheaper in Latin America. Salaries and fringe benefits are better in the U.S. That's why people want to come here.
Yeah.
So what you could end up having happening, and I bet the people that think that this is such great stuff that on the surface level think it sounds so wonderful. I wonder how you're going to feel when some of your closest relatives who are sitting in federal prisons, when we decide from DOGE, what is that called, Doge?
Doge.
When we decide that we can house prisoners cheaper in El Salvador, and they start deporting your precious Hito that you would like to be able to at least have a video visit with regularly and go to and have a, how do they visit these days? Do you get to still have contact, or do you have to do it through glass? But when you have to go to San Salvador to visit your loved one, I bet you won't think it's nearly as funny as you do right now.
Now, as like again, so I'm trying to avoid like the politics and any of that, but someone as having legal status in the United States was recently sent erroneously, and a judge said, you got to send him back, like turn the planes around, and the order was ignored, whatever that term is going to be and whatever it'll conclude it. The person ended up in El Salvador, and I'm puzzled, curious, concerned that they could act so fast on this that you might not be able to get through a court system fast enough to get a judge to make them stop, and then they can just flip the bird and not comply with the judge's order there either.
You don't think that's funny?
No. I mean, if it's one of I would worry more about the people that are less white And I'm trying to not be racist, but it seems that would be, they're more easily identifiable that way. And then you
So,
like, well, who cares about the brown people? And
well,
send them off to El Salvador.
well, what's ironic about this is that, as I understand it, I haven't followed that with great intensity, but he is an El Salvador citizen, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, well, it creates an interesting set of facts if it were to ever get to the court system for full adjudication on the merits, because he was a U.S. prisoner and the U.S. government hired and is paying money to El Salvador to house him. So he's technically in U.S. custody. It would be an extension of the state of Vermont being overcrowded and sending a prisoner to Idaho where they have extra space. They're
Right.
still a prisoner of Vermont. Now, if they commit a crime in an Idaho prison, they can be prosecuted because they're subject to the laws of Idaho while they're there. Same would be true here, that this person will be subject to prosecution in El Salvador if he commits a crime. But I think he's in U.S. custody. And I think the U.S. government would have the ability to bring him back. But it would be interesting for this litigation because the administration is saying, we just can't go in with all guns blazing and get him. He's one of theirs, but he's also one of ours. He's there
Right.
being housed for us on our dime. It's an unknown unknown. We don't know.
God, I can't remember where I saw it too. And someone was talking about the constitutionality, like your medical treatment of. I'm almost inclined to say that the medical treatment in our prison system would be better than what you would get in El Salvador, which sounds kind of horrifying because medical treatment in prison is really, really atrocious. But then to say that it would be worse or worser, as I like to say, that sounds even, well, worser.
I would imagine that even if this is a modern prison, and I think it is, I would imagine that the care that you get in most U.S. prisons would be better than what you would get there. That's just my guess.
Yep.
I've not been there, but I would imagine that we have stronger protections constitutionally, and that your treatment would be better. The officer corps would be more professional. Not to say that they're great, but they'd be more professional. So I don't think I'd want to be in El Salvador prison.
All right. So Larry said it here. Be afraid. Be very, very afraid.
It would definitely be something I would be concerned about when you have an administration that seems to be thumb in its law at the rule, thumb in its nose with the rule of law and judicial decisions. How are you going to feel when the next time a state loses a PFR challenge and they flip the middle finger at the court and say, good, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to be okay
Right.
with that?
Yep.
And if you're not going to be okay with it, then how can you be okay with anybody flipping their bird at the court saying that we're not going to do this, and what are you going to do about it?
Sure. Definitely. Do you want to cover any of these articles?
No, I didn't get a chance to do any prep today, but we do have some good ones to cover, particularly the executioners. We can go over next week about who are the executioners that kill people.
Right.
So I think I've got a clip that we'll have queued up for next week. It's Reagan saying the biggest collection.
I believe that I have that one here if you want me to play it now.
Yeah, that's what we'll tease it with.
Run by the strangest collection of misfits, Looney Tunes, since the advent of the Third Reich.
There's your teaser.
That's who the executioners are.
Well, head over to registrymatters.co for show notes, and then head over to Registry Matters Cast. Excuse me, not head over to, but email registrymatterscast@gmail.com. If you would like to send a note over to me or Larry, please, if you're so very generous, go over to patreon.com/Registry Matters to become a patron. You can join the Discord server. There's links there for the show notes. In the show notes for Discord. And then there's also some hot swag over at fypeducation.org/shop. So many slashes, Larry.
Yes, and I forgot to give a shout out to Doug in Michigan. We have a letter from you that came in on the 3rd of April, and we're going to get to parts of it that are very important. We just haven't had a slot for it yet, but yes, we're going to eventually cover that portions of that letter.
Very good. Well, I hope you have a good night and stay warm, and I'm going to roast and turn on my air conditioner.
Yes, well, I'll be nice and cool tonight.
Very good. Have a great night.
Good night.
You've been listening to FYP.